Good afternoon and welcome to NTD News. Here today's top stories. Some states say a return to normal is on the horizon, with some already starting to reopen gradually, but others worry that the relaxation of measures will lead to another spike in cases. 16 Republican senators are raising concerns over developing countries' growing debt to China. The countries took loans from the Chinese regime as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. A South Korean official has dismissed reports that the North Korean leader could be unwell. Speculation is rising, but experts say it's not the first time Kim has disappeared from state media. And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson had his first day back at work today, after more than 3 weeks off sick with the virus. After weekend reopenings in states like Georgia and Oklahoma, more states will now start to loosen coronavirus or CCP virus-related restrictions. Even New York is beginning its preparations.
In Colorado Monday, retail businesses can open with curbside pickup and elective medical procedures can resume. Despite loosening some restrictions, Governor Jared Polis says he does worry about another spike.
It's why we've been laser focused as an administration on figuring out how we can endure and sustain.
This week, Montana, Tennessee, Minnesota, and Iowa will follow states like Georgia and Oklahoma in relaxing some business restrictions. States like Florida say they're not there yet.
If people don't have confidence, then the economy's not going to just take off. That's just not the way it works.
Even hard-hit New York has a plan for reopening, if not a timeline. Governor Andrew Cuomo said Sunday an eventual reopening will be phased, starting with construction and manufacturing, but all businesses should think about a new normal.
Think about it in terms of people. How are you going to protect your people? What are you going to be doing differently with your employees? Your actual physical space.
Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin on Sunday expressed optimism about an economic bounce back starting in July. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett, however, said to expect some shocks on the immediate horizon.
I think that the next couple of months are going to look terrible. You're going to see numbers that are as bad as anything that we've ever seen.
And senators have raised concerns over the way China is making the world's poorest countries heavily indebted. U.S. senators say China's lending is not consistent with global standards.
16 Republican senators have expressed concern about developing countries being weighed down by Chinese debt. Many countries, including Nepal, Gambia, Sierra Leone and Mozambique, are heavily indebted to China. The communist regime offered these countries loans under its foreign policy project called the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. Beijing aims to build its geopolitical influence along trade routes linking China, Southeast Asia, Africa and Europe. Senator Marco Rubio said Friday the 16 senators sent a joint letter to Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. They urged the State Department and the Treasury to consider the impact of the Chinese-financed BRI on the finances of many troubled economies, and raised further concerns that these Chinese debts could lead to countries needing additional support from the International Monetary Fund or World Bank. Earlier this month, the IMF announced it would provide immediate debt relief to its poorest members, including Nepal, Gambia, Sierra Leone and Mozambique, countries signed on to the Chinese BRI. China rolled out the BRI, also known as One Belt, One Road, in 2013.
And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is back. It's his first day at work since he was hospitalised with the CCP virus. Our UK correspondent Jane Worrell reports from London.
Standing outside Downing Street again, the Prime Minister back to work.
I'm sorry I've been away from my desk for much longer than I would have liked.
He thanked the public for their forbearance for sticking to the social distancing rules, but he warned against lifting the lockdown too early.
And I want to get this economy moving as fast as I can, but I refuse to throw away all the effort and the sacrifice of the British people, and to risk a second major outbreak and huge loss of life and the overwhelming of the NHS.
He's had more than 3 weeks off sick with the virus, which he referred to in his speech as an invisible mugger. The UK started lockdown later than many of its European neighbours, and the measures have been in place for about a month. More than 20,000 people in the UK have lost their lives to the virus.
I feel London is going through a very depressed time these days. I'm optimistic that better days are ahead in London, and I can't wait to see the people enjoying themselves.
It's very tough, but we see the benefits of it, and we're just grateful it isn't too restrictive, unlike some other countries.
The government is required by law to review the measures every 3 weeks. The next review is on May the 7th. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
And a group of UK politicians recently set up a research group to debate policies towards China. Follows calls from senior Conservatives in the UK to rethink Sino-British relations. And now to Italy, which is preparing to gradually end Europe's longest lockdown. The country will allow factories and building sites to reopen from May 4th and also permit limited family visits.
Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said on Sunday that the country would allow factories and building sites to reopen from May 4th. This will enable more businesses such as retailing to open in the following weeks.
So from the very beginning on May 4th, wholesale will start, but obviously a commercial outpouring will be necessary. Therefore, we plan to open retailing on May 18th.
He said schools will remain shut until the start of the new academic year in September, leaving parents returning to work facing childcare problems for months to come. The country's restaurants and bars will be allowed to reopen from the beginning of June. And limited family visits and funerals with no more than 15 people present will also be permitted, but movement between the regions remains suspended. On Sunday, Italian authorities reported a third consecutive daily fall in coronavirus fatalities, with 260 deaths, the lowest number since March 14th. The number of new infections was falling too, to the lowest number in the last week. Italy's death toll remains the heaviest in Europe from the CCP virus, with more than 26,000 dead and 200,000 confirmed cases of the disease.
And Japan is set to block foreign entry from 14 more countries. It includes Russia, Peru, and Saudi Arabia. The country's prime minister said the rule would come into effect on Wednesday.
Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced Monday he's adding more nations to the country's entry ban list.
14 countries such as Russia, Peru and Saudi Arabia, which are countries whose infection disease risk information was raised to level 3 with travel suspension recommendations last week on the 24th of April, will be added to the areas subject to entry refusal under the immigration laws.
Foreign citizens who have been to those places will not be allowed to enter Japan within 14 days. The ban will go into effect Wednesday midnight. This will add to Japan's pre-existing travel ban for over 70 countries. Japan is in a state of emergency, and officials are gauging whether to extend the measure past May 6th. The country has over 13,000 CCP virus cases, along with over 700 more cases from a cruise ship that was quarantined near Tokyo.
So far in Japan, 372 people have died from the virus. Now back to the US. The Internal Revenue Service is asking thousands of employees to voluntarily return to work. The IRS says it needs more workers on site to perform essential functions. That includes opening mail and processing paper returns. It's all to help get taxpayers the refunds. The IRS says it will follow social distancing guidelines, require masks, and provide personal protective gear for workers. The agency is also offering incentive pay for those who do choose to come back to work. And in New York, all remaining patients on the USNS Comfort have been discharged. It's expected to leave the state this week.
The naval hospital ship has been docked in New York City for weeks to help with the influx of virus patients in the area. The ship's initial mission was to treat only non-virus patients. But the U.S. military later said the Comfort would take patients without regard to whether they tested positive for COVID-19 or not. A United States defense official says the USNS Comfort is still expected to depart at the end of the month. It will be cleaned and disinfected prior to leaving.
And football fans showed up for the NFL draft online and set a new record while they did it. The opening night of this year's virtual draft drew an average of 15.6 million viewers across its broadcasters. The last high was in 2014 with 12.4 million viewers. Not surprising, given millions of people are stuck at home and starved for sports content. And in other news, researchers are scrambling to find a way to safely disinfect N95 masks for reuse. Many are turning to the man behind its virus-blocking technology. He's a Taiwanese-American scientist. He invented the filtration fabric inside the mask nearly 30 years ago and spent decades perfecting it.
Peter Tsai invented the N95 mask 30 years ago, which is now one of the most sought-after pieces of protective gear for frontline medical workers. With hospitals across the US facing shortages of mask supplies, researchers scramble to find a way to safely disinfect N95 for reuse. Tsai, a material scientist and engineer, came out of retirement and rejoined research efforts.
I did not expect that this will happen, but this happens. So it comes all of a sudden. So I don't have time to fear something. I just feel obligated to help the industries and to provide information to find a way to sterilize the mask.
In some hospitals, supply is so low that some have reportedly resorted to using soapy water, alcohol, or bleach to sterilize their gear. But experts warn that those decontamination methods are not effective and could, in fact, damage the mask. Tsai said he is currently looking at whether exposing the masks to high temperatures for a specific period of time could work.
And coming up, a South Korean official says there's nothing unusual in North Korea. This amid reports leader Kim Jong-un could be recovering from major surgery. More on that after the break.
How do we get to this point? Back in December, the coronavirus was already spreading in Wuhan, and the Chinese Communist Party was covering it up and punishing the whistleblowers who dared to report the truth. Their actions led to this pandemic, which now has us, in America, stuck in our homes and losing our jobs. To this very day, the Communist Party is still lying, making it more critical than ever for us to get honest reporting about China. The Epoch Times is able to bring you the uncensored truth because we maintain a network of underground sources inside of China, hidden from the censors of the communist government. For instance, our investigative team has been contacting individual funeral homes, hospitals, and they've obtained leaked internal documents which show that China's official numbers are massively underreported by a factor of at least 10. If you're looking for an honest source of news that can keep you informed and safe, check out The Epoch Times. Go to readepoch.com and try your first month for just $1 and get real journalism delivered straight to your doorstep.
Welcome back. South Korea's intelligence community says it's confident there's nothing unusual happening in North Korea. North Korea's leader has been out of sight for more than 2 weeks.
A South Korean official who oversees engagement with North Korea warned against speculation over the recent absence of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He said Sunday there was nothing out of the ordinary happening.
Our government has enough information gathering capabilities to say confidently that there is nothing unusual.
Kim last appeared in state media over 2 weeks ago. Satellite images show a special train, possibly belonging to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, parked in one of the country's resort towns last week. Washington-based Project 38 North, which monitors North Korean affairs, reviewed the images. 38 North says the train was parked at a station in the city of Wonsan on April 21st and 23rd. The station is reportedly privately owned by the Kim family and close to their seaside compound, with yachts, jet skis, and a horse track. South Korea's top foreign policy advisor Moon Jong-in said Kim is alive and well and has stayed in Wonsan for weeks. Speculation began following Kim's absence from one of the country's biggest yearly events, the birthday of his grandfather Kim Il-sung, earlier this month. Then last week, Seoul-based website Daily NK reported a source told them Kim was recovering from a cardiovascular procedure. The source reported the procedure took place at Hyangsan Hospital on April 12th. Unification Minister Kim cast doubt on whether the surgery actually took place.
I've never heard of Kim Jong-un's visit to Haeangseong, and since Haeangseong Medical Center is a regular health clinic, this is not a place for a medical procedure.
Wonsan is also reportedly one of Kim's preferred sites for missile tests. Reporting on North Korea is notoriously difficult due to tight information control. Experts also caution that Kim has disappeared from his country's state media before.
And State Secretary Mike Pompeo said this week that China knew about the CCP virus as early as November. He called on China to be more transparent with data and share early virus samples.
In a Thursday interview with media, State Secretary Mike Pompeo said that China knew about the CCP virus as early as November, but to this day failed to share actual samples of it. He says it's putting the world's people at risk. He also said on Wednesday the lack of early samples are causing difficulty in understanding the virus.
The CCP still has not shared the virus sample from inside of China with the outside world, making it impossible to track the disease's evolution.
Understanding the virus is critical for scientists to develop test kits, come up with prevention measures and treatments, and develop vaccines. But the Chinese regime hasn't allowed the rest of the world to access the precious data.
It censored those who tried to warn the world. It ordered a halt to testing of new samples, and it destroyed existing samples.
According to an internal document widely quoted by Chinese media and local government websites, Beijing authorities ordered all Chinese institutions to destroy the virus samples. It also prohibited them from sharing the information with the outside world. The document was issued to local health officials on January 3rd. It also forbade Chinese institutions from publishing any relevant research paper or lab results without official permission. In addition, the Chinese regime shut down a lab in Shanghai 1 day after the facility published the virus genome sequence on foreign websites. The lab was the first inside China to release that information. This might partially explain the scarcity of data on the virus among other governments. Pompeo promised that the Chinese regime will pay a price for what they did and said that the goal right now is to control the virus. Hanny Zhou, NTD News.
Coming up, Britain becomes the fourth country in Europe to exceed 20,000 deaths from the CCP virus. And one British lawmaker says the West must hold China accountable. More on that after the break.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting. I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国揭秘.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
Yeah, I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.
Welcome back. Now let's head over to London with NTD UK's Neil Woodrow. Catch up with what's happening across Europe.
Hello and welcome to NTD UK, bringing you UK and Euro news. I'm Neil Woodrow. As Britain joins France, Spain and Italy with deaths from the virus topping 20,000, the British government is taking action to ensure the country does not run short of life-saving medicines and vital supplies.
The British government is taking steps to keep the country's freight routes open in response to the pandemic. UK Transport Minister Grant Shapps announced a new agreement with France and Ireland to protect access to vital supplies.
Bringing in life-saving medicines, food and many other essential goods, allowing us time to meet the needs of our countries during this difficult period.
But cargo ship operators on these routes face financial pressure due to falling demand. The British government said it's important to guarantee that these services continue, pledging up to $21 billion to protect freight routes. This includes dozens of trade routes between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, as well as 8 other European countries. Britain has the 4th highest number of deaths from the CCP virus in Europe after France, Spain and Italy.
In the UK's Telegraph on Friday, previous leader of the UK's Conservative Party, Ian Duncan Smith, writes, "The West must ensure China pays for its role in the spread of COVID-19. He said that the West assumed giving China access to Western free markets would lead to democracy and increased freedoms, but instead, China has tightened up with greater central control and more abuses of human rights. Mr. Duncan Smith called this Project Kowtow and said, the West rarely, if ever, confronts it about its behaviour. Senior Conservative Party members launched a new commission Friday night to look into the UK's relationship with China. The China Research Group is led by Commons Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Tom Tugendhat. Evidence of this kowtow diplomacy was brought to light when it was reported by the New York Times that a European Union report last week was rewritten to minimise blame on China. The EU report looked at disinformation surrounding the CCP virus crisis. According to the New York Times, one line in the report originally read, "Continued and coordinated push by official Chinese sources to deflect any blame." The report was then updated and now reads, "We see continued and coordinated push by some actors, including Chinese sources, to deflect any blame." Other references criticizing China were removed. Air travel is one of the first and worst hit industries by the CCP virus pandemic. Several airlines around the world are struggling to survive. The French national airline Air France announced it will get at least $7.6 billion in a government bailout.
Air France is set to receive a $7.6 billion bailout from the French government. French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said Friday this will save 350,000 jobs. Air France and its partner Dutch airline KLM said earlier this month they expect their joint traffic to be down more than 90% in the coming months. They said this was due in part to measures that would limit the number of seats that can be occupied, but also because some people were still too afraid to fly. The International Air Transport Association says applying social distancing measures on an aeroplane completely destroys the way airlines operate.
And if you neutralize, 1/3 of your seats, it means that you will have to increase your fares by 50% at least. So in terms of what travel represents in our societies, it means that cheap travel is over.
An IATA survey published last week indicates some 40% of air travellers plan to wait at least 6 months before returning to the skies, and almost 70% said they would hold off from flying because of the state of their personal finances. Meanwhile, the Dutch finance minister announced Friday the Dutch government will provide an equivalent of $2 to $4 billion to help KLM. Both Air France and KLM Airlines tried for weeks prior to negotiate a bailout with their respective governments. Other major airlines, including Germany's Lufthansa, are also negotiating government aid deals as they grapple with the air travel shutdown.
Want to see top tennis players battling it out in a live tournament? Well, you can, virtually. Players such as Spain's Rafa Nadal and Britain's Andy Murray are taking part on a court recreated in the Tennis World Tour video game. You can tune in through Facebook Gaming, where there's prize money and post-match interviews. The live action begins at 1400 GMT today. Who's going to win? That's all for now. See you next time.
And coming up, a 73-year-old diner in Virginia is closed to customers due to the state's lockdown. So instead, it's opening its kitchen to those in need. Find out more about the diner turned food pantry when we return. Welcome back. A community diner in Virginia has been serving up meals for 73 years. While it's closed to customers at the moment, it's open to those who are in need. Owner John Wood explains how the diner is now operating as a free food pantry for food and supplies.
This means the world to me. This is our community. This is our lives. My name is John Wood. I'm the owner of 29 Diner.
Why wait or ride shows with us?
It's been a very, very stressful, a very difficult time.
Me as well. Go ahead and grab two. One of you can grab cold food.
A few weeks ago, we just decided that as this crisis mounted, that we needed to do something more. We wanted to create a free food pantry for the community to be able to come in and get free food.
Right now what we're doing is prepping a kid's bag.
Cars pull up, they'll be right out to your car. We ask them how many family members they have.
Well, give me a couple minutes to throw all that together.
We then come in and shop for them.
We were gonna do some household items.
A family of 4 comes in here. They typically get between $60 and $100 worth of free groceries. It's a pay it forward program. Most of those folks that get a little something, give a little something.
This jar was empty when we started today, right?
And then our online platforms have grown tremendously. What's going on, everybody? Funding what we're doing here.
This is a small thing that we can do to help him.
We raise thousands of dollars on a very regular basis, and then we reinvest that in all the goods that are here in the restaurant.
He's making something positive out of something that's scary or unknown to so many people. It's wonderful.
This isn't a story about me or the restaurant. It's about our community.
All right. Hey, thanks, John, for everything you're doing.
If we take care of our community and we show them that we love them and we care for them as we get through these difficult times, we believe that it'll come back to us.
Wood says the food and supplies are for anyone who needs them, but he especially wants to help families, at-risk youth and first responders. And in London, players of Premier League soccer team Arsenal were able to use their training facility again today. Social distancing and individual training measures were enforced, but it's a sign that soccer is preparing for a return.
A small step towards the resumption of Premier League soccer in North London, as Arsenal announced it will be reopening its training ground on Monday. Players will be able to return to the facility and train on an individual basis as the club continues to observe social distancing rules. Access will be limited, carefully managed, and social distancing will be maintained at all times, the club said in a statement Saturday. All soccer in England has been suspended since mid-March, with discussions still continuing as to how and when it will be safe to restart the season again. But with the ban on mass public gatherings likely to be one of the last restrictions to be lifted, rescheduled games will almost certainly be held behind closed doors. Squads will need around 2 to 3 weeks of training before playing competitive matches, making June the earliest possible return to the field.
And good news for a group of Dutch high school students. They arrived home this weekend after virus restrictions forced them to take a transatlantic voyage.
25 Dutch high school students ages 14 to 17 were greeted by relieved parents on Sunday. The group, watched over by 12 experienced crew members and 3 teachers, was on an educational cruise of the Caribbean when the pandemic forced them to radically change their plans. Instead of flying home from Cuba back in March, they set sail for the northern Dutch port of Harlingen. The voyage took 5 weeks and covered over 4,000 miles. They traveled on board the 200-foot topsail schooner Wild Swan. According to 17-year-old Floor Herkmans, the impromptu adventure was eye-opening.
It was just so weird because on the boat you don't really notice anything about corona except that you can't go to the islands. So when you hear those things, you don't really believe it until you're here and there are all these fences and you can't really hug anyone.
Her mother, Renee Schultemeijer, said she expects her daughter to miss life on the open sea once she's under lockdown at home.
I think that after 2 days, she'll want to go back on the boat because life is very boring back at home because of the lockdown.
Cruise organizer Christoph Meijer explained the students were monitored for the virus to ensure no one was infected.
We checked everything, took their temperatures, every cough or sneeze was written down. And after 14 days we knew there's no corona on the Wild Swan.
As their bucket list adventure came to an end, the teenagers hugged and chanted each other's names before going home.
That's the latest updates for now. Thank you for tuning in. You can catch up again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Paul Graney.